Hello everyone, I'm Cameron Bertuzzi, and in this video I'm going to be answering Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson's challenge calling for evidence for God's existence. So the other day, I came across a video from Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson where he says, "Bring it! If you have evidence for God's existence." So I'm gonna bring it. I'll introduce 3 pieces of evidence that I think support theism over naturalism. The first piece of evidence is the existence of dependent things. The second piece of evidence is the fine-tuning of the universe for life. And the third piece of evidence is the existence of moral knowledge. All right, so here's the clip where I saw Dr. Tyson give this challenge originally.
I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go, okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. But if you got some good evidence, bring it.
Now, unfortunately, I haven't been doing this for 20 years. Apparently that's the cutoff, but I'll give it a shot. In what follows, I'm going to lay out 3 pieces of evidence that I think support theism over naturalism. The first piece of evidence is the existence of dependent things. Everything in our experience exists dependently. This mug on my desk, for example, depends on other things for its existence. It hasn't always been here, it was built. My computer, my speakers, my headphones, my house, literally everything that we come in contact with depends on something else for its existence. And here's the really interesting thing about this is that if you think about reality as a whole, all of reality exists independently. There can't be an outside explanation of everything that exists. That's actually impossible. Now, the reason why this is puzzling is because in the same way that you can't build a brick house out of water, you can't get an independent existence out of dependent things. Dr. Josh Rasmussen, who I've had on the channel a bunch, he calls this a construction problem. Adding more and more dependent things together doesn't suddenly make the group independent. A group of 10 cameras, for example, is not suddenly independent because you have a group of 10. But again, the question is, how can all of reality exist independently when the building blocks of reality that we're familiar with exist dependently? The solution to this problem of dependence, as it's known in the literature, is to posit a necessary foundation that has its existence independently. The reason that reality in total is independent, even though everything we experience is dependent, is because there is a necessary thing at the foundation of reality that explains everything else. This solves the puzzle, and notice what we have here. We have a necessary thing at the foundation of reality. Now, I think that this necessary thing would actually have to be perfect in order to have the kind of independent existence that it has. But let's turn and look at 2 additional pieces of evidence that I think help flesh out this concept further, that this necessary foundation is both personal and good. The second piece of evidence that I'll touch on is called fine-tuning. The fact that our universe is life-permitting is actually remarkable. If the conditions of our universe were just slightly different, life couldn't evolve anywhere in the cosmos. Let's take an extreme example. Suppose that gravity for a moment didn't exist. Without gravity, there'd be no planets, no stars, no galaxies, nothing like what we see in our universe. Life can't exist in a universe where molecules don't stick together. Life needs an attractive force like gravity. But it doesn't just need any kind of gravity, it needs to be set at just the right strength. Physicists have estimated that if the strength of gravity had been just 1 part in 10 to the 60th stronger, then the universe would have just collapsed back in on itself right after the Big Bang. And if it had been 1 part in 10 to the 60th weaker, matter would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. Oh, and if you want a citation for these calculations, then check the link in the description. To put these numbers into perspective, getting the strength of gravity right for life by chance would basically be like the guy next to you at a poker table being dealt 10 royal flushes in a row by chance. I mean, it's technically possible that he's not cheating, like maybe he was dealt those hands fairly, but yeah, we all know that he was cheating. In the literature, there are about 10 to 12 cases of fine-tuning like this, and each one of these makes the problem worse and worse and worse for naturalism. Now, if you'd like to see my conversation with an actual cosmologist on all of the evidence for fine-tuning, check the link in the description. Now, just like it would be extraordinarily unlikely to be dealt 10 royal flushes in a row by chance, it would be extraordinarily unlikely that our universe would be life-permitting by chance. Now, the reason that this is evidence for theism is that it's not so unlikely or improbable that a good God would want to create a universe that can support life. Think of it like fingerprint evidence in a court case. The probability that any 2 people would have the same fingerprint is about 1 in a billion. So finding a matching fingerprint at the scene of the crime doesn't prove with 100% certainty that this person is guilty, but it provides pretty good evidence for guilt over innocence. And so pretty much in exactly the same way, fine-tuning provides very good evidence for theism over naturalism. Now the third piece of evidence that I'll discuss is called moral knowledge. And before I proceed, let me just make a quick distinction here. Traditional moral arguments say that God is necessary, or in some cases, God is the best explanation of moral facts. Without God, these arguments say, we're not actually obligated to do what's right or wrong. But the argument for moral knowledge isn't about what grounds moral facts. Rather, this argument is about the knowledge of moral facts. Now, the reason that this distinction is important is because I'm not saying that God is necessary to ground objective morality. Maybe naturalism can account for moral facts. I don't know. What this argument focuses on is knowledge of moral facts. A few months ago, I interviewed a professional philosopher named Erik Wielenberg on his case for objective morality. As an atheist, he thinks there are really good reasons to think that we have knowledge of objective moral facts. For example, he claims that we know that it's objectively wrong to torture infants for fun. From this point forward, I'm going to assume that you've watched that interview and are now convinced that we do have this kind of moral knowledge. All right, with that out of the way, let's get to the argument. Now, on naturalism, it's quite surprising that unguided evolution would produce beings that have accurate beliefs about morality. Darwin actually realized the problem when he wrote, if, for instance, to take an extreme case, men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. On naturalism, it would be an inexplicable, miraculous coincidence if our beliefs about morality somehow track the truth. And that's not a coincidence that naturalists can reasonably accept. This is exactly what naturalist philosopher Sharon wrote in a recent article she wrote entitled, A Darwinian Dilemma for Realist Theories of Value. There she writes, allowing our evaluative judgments to be shaped by evolutionary influences is analogous to setting out for Bermuda and letting the course of your boat be determined by the wind and tides. Just as the push of the wind and tides on your boat has nothing to do with where you want to go, so the historical push of natural selection on the content of our evaluative judgments has nothing to do with evaluative truth. Of course, it's possible that as a matter of sheer chance, some large portion of our evaluative judgments ended up true due to a happy coincidence, but this would require a fluke of luck that's not only extremely unlikely in view of the huge universe of logically possible evaluative judgments and truths, but also astoundingly convenient. The link to Street's paper, if you want to read it, is in the description. Street's point is that evolution could have produced beings with any number of moral beliefs. It's therefore extremely unlikely that unguided evolution would just happen to produce beings with the correct set of moral beliefs. This would be like setting sail across the Atlantic Ocean with no steering mechanism and just happening to arrive at the right port. It's possible to do that, but it's just extremely unlikely. On theism, however, it's not so unlikely that a good God would want to create beings with reliable beliefs about morality. Since knowledge is good, and knowledge of right and wrong is good, a good God would want us to know right and wrong. And obviously, he'd know what cognitive equipment we would need in order to discover moral truth. Theism has the explanatory resources, in other words, to explain moral knowledge. In the same way that a life-permitting universe is strong evidence for theism, moral knowledge is strong evidence for theism. Now, in response to this third piece of evidence for moral knowledge, atheists will sometimes say that the God of the Bible can't actually be the good God that we're talking about here because he commanded really atrocious things in the Bible. Let me give 3 quick thoughts on this. First, this is a great rhetorical strategy because it's actually a really emotional subject, and so it has really high rhetorical appeal. Playing on people's emotions is actually a really effective strategy. Advertisers use it all the time. Second, while this objection is clearly worth thinking about and addressing, it's completely unrelated to my argument, like completely unrelated. Nothing in this argument at all requires the assumption that the Bible is the inspired word of God. In other words, this objection is actually kind of a way of avoiding my argument. Third, if you didn't know this, Christians have not been silent on these types of objections. Christian philosopher Paul Copan, for example, has a great book called Is God a Moral Monster?, where he addresses all of these kinds of objections. So by raising this objection, atheists aren't making like a definitive point against Christianity. Really what they're doing is just opening a real big theological can of worms. Now, if you'd like more of my thoughts on these types of objections to Christianity, make sure to check the link in the description. But my major point in response to this is that this is really just a red herring. I think Christians ought to have a good answer to these types of objections, but it's completely unrelated to my argument. Now, before I move on, I want to address another objection that I sometimes see from atheists, that God is just this really complex hypothesis. Some atheists even think that God is like the most complex hypothesis there is. Now, I personally think that this is bogus. Perfect being theism is actually remarkably simple. It postulates one being, God, with one property, perfection. But wait, the atheist might think, The reason that God is so complex is because it postulates an infinite God with an infinite mind. But in my view, I think that this is a misunderstanding of simplicity. The simplicity of a theory isn't actually measured by how much the theory entails. I mean, every theory actually entails an infinite number of propositions. The simplicity of a theory is measured by the concepts required to understand the theory. Compare perfect being theism with the naturalistic concept of an infinite multiverse. Perfect being theism postulates one object with one property, whereas the infinite multiverse postulates an infinite number of entities with trillions and trillions of particles, all with different properties. It's obvious to me, at least, which one of these theories is simpler. Moreover, note how perfect being theism compares to something like the flying spaghetti monster. The flying spaghetti monster is not simple. It's composed of many physical parts. It has a certain geometrical shape. It has arbitrary limits in size, power, and knowledge, and so on. In an effort to make the flying spaghetti monster more analogous to God, atheists will sometimes remove the properties that make it complex in order to make it seem more like God. Oh, they'll say, my flying spaghetti monster has no limits in shape. It has no parts. It's unlimited in size and power and knowledge and so on. This was actually Professor Wolpert's strategy in his debate with Dr. William Lane Craig, but instead of the flying spaghetti monster, he appealed to a supercomputer. Let's watch.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't, computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it time? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function, it takes
Oh
time.
no, this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent.
Yes, you have to be logically coherent.
Oh no, this computer is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
And a computer is a physical
Not this computer.
object.
Oh,
Well, then,
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical, It's just another word if you rob it of all the attributes that make it a computer.
As we can see in this clip, this strategy actually backfires. If you're going to remove all of the properties that make it distinct from God, you're not being clever, you're just calling God by a different name. And in my view, you're actually demonstrating that you can understand the simplicity of theism. Theism is not as complex as the flying spaghetti monster or supercomputer or infinite multiverse. That's why taking away these properties make the theory better and help it out. To quickly summarize my response to Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson's challenge, I've provided 3 pieces of evidence, dependent things, fine-tuning, and moral knowledge, that together provide strong evidence for theism over naturalism. I also argued that perfect being theism is a remarkably simple concept and therefore can't be objected to on the basis of complexity. If you want to see a lot more evidence for theism, then check the description. All right, I know that was a lot, but give me a break. Dr. Tyson literally said, "Bring it!" So I had to. Well, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of my response to Dr. Tyson's challenge in the comments of this video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me financially, visit patreon.com/capturingchristianity. By the way, I support my wife and 2 kids through this ministry, so any financial support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, always remember that Jesus rose bodily from the dead.